Hello everyone, my name is Claudius Kazan. In this video, we take a look for the first time at a Bach choral, Johann Sebastian Bach that is, and I chose Nun Danket, alle, Gott, which translates, Now Thank We All Our God. It's a very popular hymn present in many denominational hymn books. The tune of this particular one was not written by Bach. It was actually written by Johann Krüger. If you remember a few videos back, we talked about Johann Krüger, and we analyzed one of his early chorales. I chose this particular one because Bach is highlighting a lot of non-chord tones in here. So the focus today is going to be on non-chord tones and modulation. I will also perform for you number 45 from Robert Starr's Rhythmic training book and Solfege number 48. I will be right back. Welcome back. Let's take a look at the first page of this chorale. It's written in A major, 3 sharps in the key signature, and you'll notice that the sopranos are starting quite high. This was a problem in Bach's time too. A lot of choir performers were complaining that he was writing very high parts, too many notes and so on. But Bach's music is Bach's music, and we have to be true to it. It's true also today that you need to be a trained professional or a good performer to perform Bach's music the way Bach intended it to be performed. So he had no mercy on the performers. He wrote parts that were demanding, music that deserves the best performers out there. Okay, very good. I'm going to go to the piano right now, and I'm going to perform this chorale for you, and then we'll come back and dive right in and do some harmonic analysis on it. Great. Thank you for listening. Let's dive right in and look at the first 3 beats in here. This is what I highlighted. And I highlighted 3 beats because the harmony, the underlying harmony does not change. It's the chord of the 1 in A major. All right. And on the second beat of the on the first full measure, he moves to the chord of the 1/6, which means the first inversion of that chord. Nothing special. You also see a passing tone in the bass, okay, tying nicely between the A, the tonic, and the C sharp, the note in the bass for the 1/6 chord. Okay. Moving on to the second part of the full measure. This is the chord of the 4, okay, and also with the first inversion midway. Okay, there's also another passing tone in the bass, and the underlying harmony for this entire 2 beats is chord of the 4. This is definitely a church hymn. You hear this 1-4-1 underlying harmonic structure, and you think, okay, you know, because of that cadence there, 4-1, the plagal cadence, the amen cadence as we call it, you know for sure this is a church hymn. Okay, let's move on because the harmonies are very simple here. The last chord on the second measure, it's that of the 6/6, meaning that that's the minor chord of the 6 in first inversion. Okay, nothing too difficult here. Moving to the chord of the 5/6/5, meaning it's a seventh chord in first inversion, okay, the dominant chord, and back to the 1, and then chord of the 5 again with the passing tone in the bass, and chord of the 1/6 moving to the root position at the very end of this line. However, let's take a look at the non-chord tone called an escape tone that happens in the soprano. All right, I have isolated this little formula for you, and I've isolated the top two voices, the sopranos and the altos, and I'm going to play what's on screen right now. We're going to concentrate on the circled note, the escape tone, and first of all, I want you to listen to this. Okay, it sounds something like this. Okay, our focus is going to be now on the fourth beat of the first measure, okay, where we have these two A and C sharp. Okay, and I want you to take a look at the red arrow that I put in there. Okay, the melodic line, if we take away that escape tone, goes from C sharp to B and finally to the A where the fermata is. Okay, so that's the important line that the sopranos are going through. It's a descending line from C sharp to B and finally to the A. Okay, and what this escape tone does basically, it goes against the melodic line, leaps up, okay, in the opposite direction of where the melodic line goes, and then leaps down to meet the melodic line. So basically, okay, and that's called an escape tone. It's a non-chord tone at that point, meaning that that note really does not belong to that chord. Okay, and remember, the escape tone defies the motion of the underlying melodic line. It goes against it. Okay, so if the melodic line goes down, the escape tone will go up and then leap down to resolve that non-chord tone, the escape tone. Okay, so that's what it is. Okay, now let's take a look at what happens in the altos at the same time. Okay, and here we have a suspension. We talked about suspensions last time. Okay, the preparation of that suspension happens in the fourth beat, the A in the altos. Okay, it becomes a non-chord tone when it's suspended over the bar line. Okay, and it's actually a dissonance with the sopranos. Okay, and it resolves down by half step to the G sharp. Okay, never mind that F sharp. I'm going to talk about the F sharp in 1 second. But again, just to make sure that you understand the suspension formula, preparation on the fourth beat, okay, becomes a non-chord tone right after the bar line. The underlying harmony changes, becomes a dissonance, and you can see that with the sopranos, and it resolves down by half step in the next beat, okay, on the G sharp. Now, you're going to ask me what's going on with that F sharp in between. Well, here's what it is. That F sharp, it's called a nota cambiata. Nota in Italian means pitch or a note, cambiata of change. So it's a change pitch. It's also called exchange tone. We call it an exchange tone. Or if you want to keep the Italian term, nota cambiata. So if you hear the term nota cambiata, you know what it is right now. Okay, let's take a look at, see what nota cambiata does. Okay, the underlying line here for the altos is from the A, of course, okay, to the G sharp, the resolution there. But before he gives you the resolution, he throws in this nota cambiata. Now let's see what it does. It goes from the A, but before it resolves, it leaps down and then back up. Okay, so basically the nota cambiata is very much like the escape tone, but it does things in the opposite direction. Okay, it does things in the same direction as the melodic line. So if the melodic line goes down, the nota cambiata will leap down even more and then go back up. The escape tone goes against the melodic line, and the nota cambiata goes in line with the melodic line. Okay, you can stop the video at this point and just study my little schematic here of these two voices, having the escape tone, the suspension, and nested within the suspension, you have this nota cambiata that happens in the alto line. Okay? Very good. Let's go on now and see what's going on. Before we go to the next line, let's analyze the cadence on this first line. We have the plagal cadence between the first and the second full measures here. Okay? And that's because we have the chord of the 4 resolving to the chord of the 1. Okay? Anything that goes 4 to 1 at the cadence, it's called a plagal cadence, or popularly the amen cadence. Very good. Second line. Okay? We already talked about the soprano and the altos here, but let's take a look now at what happens in the tenors. Okay? And again, I've isolated the bass and the tenors. We're only interested in what the tenors do here. And let's look at this line. We have an E in the tenors. All right, let's remove those two 16th notes in there, the C sharp and the D. And what we have a melodic line that descends from E to the D to the C sharp. Okay? Now, let's put back the first 16th note, the D. What you'll end up having is this. Okay? So basically this D in here, it's a non-chord tone called an anticipation. Okay? It anticipates the resolution, okay, on the second beat. Okay? So non-chord tone, chord tone, because the underlying harmony changes, and then everything stops at the cadence and so. So remember, an anticipation is a non-chord tone that anticipates a chord tone in the next chord. Okay, that's all there is. Now let's put back the C sharp. I'm going to say, well, now what does this C sharp do in here? If you take a look at this, it's basically going from the anticipation, goes down by step and back up by step. This is called a lower neighbor. So another non-chord tone you're learning about right now, it's called a lower neighbor. The lower neighbor, okay, moves down by step and right back up. It's very much like the passing tone, but instead of continuing in the same direction, the lower neighbor will immediately go back up where it just came from. So again, Bach is nesting a lower neighbor here between the two notes of the anticipation, okay, between the anticipation and the note being anticipated. Okay, so we have the lower neighbor as well. Very good. And then everything resolves here to the chord of the 1. Okay? The underlying harmonic progression here is 5. Okay? And the first two beats of the second line. And then we have a 5-7 on the second beat. That's because that becomes the chord there becomes a seventh chord because the D is being introduced there. The E, G sharp, B, D. That D is in the tenors, okay? So big underlying harmonic chord there is 5, but then it becomes 5, and it resolves to the chord of the 1. All right, you also notice one thing in here. We have a repeat sign pretty much in the middle of that measure, okay? Usually repeat signs are like bar lines, right? They divide the bar lines, the measures, but not in this case. In this case, it's kind of in the middle because everything up to that point repeats again. The actual bar line comes in one beat afterwards. Okay, so it's possible to put a repeat sign there that it's only for the purposes of repeating and not dividing measures. Okay, so that's possible as well. Let's go on with the harmonic analysis. Okay. And we're talking about the last beat on this full measure on the second line. That's the chord of the 5 again, and it becomes first inversion 5 on the second beat of the second full measure. You'll also notice that there's a lot of passing tones here in the alto, in the tenor, in the bass. I grouped them all together there, and I call them passing tones. Okay? They're all non-chord tones, and they all do exactly the same thing. They are approached and left by step in the same direction. Those are all passing tones. Let's move on. Second part of that measure, second measure, again, highlighted 2 beats in here, all under the big harmony of 1, the chord of the 1, and 1/6 in the second. We have a passing tone on the bass. We also have a suspension now in the tenors, exactly what the altos were doing earlier, the tenors are doing right now, with the anticipation, with the lower neighbor, and all that stuff. If you guys want to pause the video here and compare to what the alto did, about 2 measures back, that's exactly what happens now in the tenors. So he's moving all this activity to the tenors. All right, very good. And everything resolves to the chord of the 5. Okay, let's talk about the cadences on this particular line. We have a perfect authentic in 1. Okay, that's because both chords are in root position, the 5 and the 1. Okay, and in the 1 chord, we have the root present in both, the bass and the soprano. And that's a recipe for perfect authentic. We also have the other cadence, the half cadence. Half cadence is when we stop on the chord of the 5, okay? So we're coming from the chord of the 1, and we have a cadence on the 5th degree. That is called a half cadence. Very good. Third line, okay? Something's happening here on the third line because I see D sharp being introduced as an accidental. Now, A major does not have a D sharp, okay? A major only has F, C, and G, but this one comes in as an accidental, and the moment I see that, I'm going to the next cadence, okay, to see where does he cadence next. And you can see right now that he cadences on the chord of E major. Okay, now what's E major in comparison to A major? That's the dominant tonality, or the dominant key, okay? Could it be possible that he's moving away from A major into E major? I think so. The D sharp is being stated again at the end of the first full measure here in the sopranos, okay? And he gives you a very nice cadence, 5/1, in the key of E. Now, every time we modulate, and we think we modulate, we owe it to ourselves to find the pivot chord. A pivot chord, again, is a chord that works equally well in both keys, and it's used to pivot or to switch between the 2 keys. And I found that immediately on the first beat of this line, okay? The chord is the chord of the 1 in A major, and it's also the chord of the 4 in the new key, E major. That's why you see 2 lines. The A major line, which is being dropped immediately after I find the pivot chord, and the line of E major, which is my new line on which I analyze all the chords coming up, okay? So it doesn't make sense for me to continue analyzing everything in A major if I know exactly where Bach is going, I have found my pivot chord, and everything sounds like it's going to E major now, okay? So again, we have double passing tones between the bass and the sopranos, okay? And next chord is the chord of the 6 in E major, the new key, okay? And also becomes the chord of the 6/6/4. 6/4 is a second inversion triad, okay? And this is because he's dropping the bass from the C sharp to the G sharp, okay? And the position of that chord changes to the 6/4. I doubt that it's very important to label it that way, but I put it in anyway, just in case someone is very particular about how they see chords happening from the bass up. Okay, so at that point, in parentheses, 6/6/4. Okay, the third beat of this, it's dedicated to the chord of the 2. Okay, first of all, as a 7th chord in first inversion, 2/6/5, and then the 2 in root position. Okay, but it's the same chord, just dropping from first inversion to root position. And then the chord of the 5 in root position, and finally 1. Now, you have this harmonic progression here, 2, 5, 1. Very popular. The 2 in this case, in many cases, has a subdominant function. All right, so you have to think subdominant, dominant, tonic. Very, very important and very much used harmonic progression here. Instead of using the chord of the 4, he's using the chord of the 2. Okay, so that's it. Now we have a cadence in the new key of E major. We have modulated away or changed keys from A to E, the dominant key. All right, let's move on. All right, this particular chord I'm analyzing here on 3 different lines. Why? Because I'm looking at my next cadence and I see that Bach is moving away from E major. He does not spend time at all in E major. He gives you a cadence E major and then he prepares immediately for the new tonality. And if I scroll to the next line, I can see that he's going to the key of B minor. Okay, now how does he do this? Let's look a little bit at what's left on this line. He does that by introducing A sharp. A sharp is the leading tone to B minor. Okay, and you state A sharp a few times, your ear immediately gets drawn to B minor, and you can set up that key really easily by just introducing A sharp. And he does this in the second beat in the basses. Okay, he also states it again in the altos at the very end of the line, and he prepares the cadence that way. All right, now let's look at the 3 different lines of analysis here. B minor. If you look at B minor here, this particular A major chord, I can analyze it as the 5 of 3. Not so interesting at this point. It's kind of remote. But if I look at the key of E, that's the chord of the 4. Okay, very important chord. And it's also the chord of the 1 in the original A major key. Okay, but remember, we have dropped A major already. So you didn't have to analyze it in A major, but you owe it to yourself to analyze it in E major because that's the key you're leaving right now, and also the new key. Now, could this chord become your pivot chord between the 2 tonalities? It's possible, but I chose my pivot chord actually on the next chord, okay, where it's the chord of the 3 in B minor, and it's also the chord of the 4 in A major, the original key. Okay, interesting here that I had to go all the way back to the original key to find the pivot chord between these 2 tonalities. Now let's think a little bit. B minor, what is B minor in relation to A major, the original key? B minor and D major are relative keys, okay? They share the same key signature, which is 2 sharps, okay? A major has 3 sharps, but D major has 2, and so does B minor, okay? So basically, he's moving to the relative minor of the subdominant key. The subdominant key is D, B minor is the relative minor, okay? Still within the very closely related keys in here. That's why we need to find pivot chords, okay, because they help us switch to these closely related keys. Okay, so remember, we're going to B minor, which is the relative minor of the subdominant key. All right, and I chose this to be my pivot chord, which it's a little weird, yes, because it's between B minor and the original key. I'm not analyzing it in E major, the key that we've just left. That's why some people could argue and say, no, I want my pivot chord to actually be on that first chord, of this particular passage here, which is the last chord of the second measure here. But, you can pick your pivot chord at this point, as long as you analyze them in both keys. Very good. Let's look at the next chord. The next chord is the chord of the 7. Okay? And you're going to ask me, well, wait a minute. Yes, the chord of the 7 in B minor should be based on A sharp. Okay? It would be a diminished triad, A sharp, C sharp, E. Okay? But that A sharp does not come into play until the second part of that beat. Okay? Which means that the first B in there, which I labeled as a passing tone, it's actually a passing tone that happens on the accented part of the beat. Usually passing tones happen on the unaccented part of the beat, but this time it's an accented passing tone. That's why I put the little accent under the PT there, and I said this is a accented passing tone. Now that means that whenever you hit that chord, with the voices and so on, you're going to hit it first with a dissonance, with a non-chord tone that resolves nicely down to the A sharp, which is the chord tone in here. So another element here, new element for you to think about and understand is the accented passing tone. Okay, a passing tone, it's usually a non-chord tone, approached and left by step in the same direction, and it's usually on the unaccented part. But here, Bach is giving you one on the accented part of the beat. It's kind of strange because you're going to hear the dissonance first happening, and then it resolves on the second part very nicely. So it's another nice little touch in here is the accented passing tone. All right, in the altos now, okay, we have another preparation for another suspension. If you look farther, you can see how the tie ties to the next note in the next chord, and it becomes a dissonance. That C sharp becomes a dissonance, so that's another suspension that resolves down to the B. Okay, the harmony here is the chord of the 1. Of course, it's a minor chord because we're going to B minor, and then it moves to the chord of the 1/6. Okay, but we have the suspension going on in here. As a matter of fact, we have a chain of suspensions. Bach is actually chaining here 2 suspensions, okay, because the resolution, that B resolution, also becomes a non-chord tone in the next beat, okay? So the preparation becomes a non-chord tone, gets resolved. That same note where he resolves becomes now another non-chord tone that needs to be resolved in the next beat. And that's what we call a chain of suspensions. If you look at the highlight of the last measure, last beat in here, you can see that I have actually circled a blank note in there. That's where the B is, because it's a quarter note from the previous beat, which means that it actually sustains through this first half of the beat. I could have broken it down with 2 eighth notes for you to understand it, but then it would look different than the score itself. Okay, this is also called a syncopation in here. So stop the video and look at the way this is written. The second suspension in the chain, it's actually, on the circled note, the blank note in there. But remember, that B from the previous beat actually gets sustained through the change of the harmony on the last beat in here. Also, he gives you an upper neighbor in the tenors. Okay, that G natural resolving down to the F sharp is called an upper neighbor. Okay, it's a non-chord tone, does not belong to the tone, to that chord, but it does get resolved in the second part of that beat to the F sharp, and the F sharp is part of the chord. Okay, so now you know about the upper neighbor. Okay, very good. Before we move on to the last line, let's take a look at the cadence. We have a perfect authentic here in 5, meaning E major. Remember that we have modulated from A to E first, and this is a perfect authentic. Both chords are in root position, and in the E major chord, the root is present in the bass and the sopranos. Very good. Now let's go to the last line. Actually, the last line here starts with the resolution to the cadence in B minor. Remember, we're moving now into B minor, and this is where this happens in here. You can actually call this your pivot chord. Now, why pivot chord? Because Bach does not spend time in B minor. He gives you the cadence again, and he moves right back into A major. Okay, and you can see this very clearly when he starts this last phrase in here. He starts it with a chord of the 1 in A major. Okay, so immediately he moves into A major There's not much happening in terms of introducing A major by certain means. No, that's his own home key, and he goes straight into it, okay? And we have a passing tone here in the bass, and that goes to the chord of the 5, and then there's 2 chords in this beat, the chord of the 1 and the chord of the 6, but I highlighted the entire beat because of the non-chord tone that happens again in the soprano. And guess what we have there? We have another escape tone, okay? C sharp, B, A in the soprano is our melodic line, but the D kind of escapes out, okay, in the opposite direction, and then it joins the line when it leaps back down to the B. Okay, so that's the, we also have the suspension, another suspension yet in the alto, okay, in the next beat. The underlying harmony is here that of the 2, 6, and then moving into the root position, and then the 5, and finally the 1. So we have again that 2, 5, 1 harmonic progression, very popular and present everywhere. Okay. We also have the anticipation here in the, I think it's in the soprano. Yep, the soprano anticipates the last A in the last chord where everything ends. Okay, so we have the escape tone, the suspension with the anticipation in the soprano, and finally the chord of the 1 at the end. Let's look at the cadences now. We have an imperfect authentic, okay? We haven't looked at too many imperfect authentics, but this is one of them. And why so? Yes, the 2 chords, the previous chord and this chord are in root position, but if you look carefully, the soprano does not have the root of the chord. The soprano has the 3rd of the chord, okay? And that spells imperfect authentic in the key of 2, okay? When we, B minor is the key of 2 basically in comparison to A major. When we analyze cadences, we always look, we compare it with the original key, okay? Just so we have a nice picture of where Bach is moving in terms of tonalities in comparison to the original tonality, okay? So the imperfect authentic here in the key of the 2, and finally the final cadence, okay, a perfect authentic in 1, because both chords are in root position, and in the resolving chord we have the root in bass and the soprano. Very good. If you've made it this far and you understand everything I was talking about, kudos to you. If not, you can repeat this. Remember, we concentrated here, we focused on non-chord tones, and we learned about a few of them. The escape tone, the nota cambiata, the upper neighbor, lower neighbor, okay? We also talked about anticipations. Anticipation we also talked about last time, and there's a lot of passing tones as well, other non-chord tones. So quite a few non-chord tones being thrown in here by Bach. It's like a, soup of non-chord tones. You have to remember that some non-chord tones can be nested within other non-chord tones or formulas, like the suspension, for example. You can throw an anticipation in there. You can throw in a nota cambiata in between. So what's important in here is for you to isolate the melodic line itself, okay, and see where the melodic line is in one particular voice, and then add elements back in and see what they do. They might anticipate, they might suspend, they might go higher, upper neighbor, lower neighbor, nota cambiatas and things like that, and you can label them properly after you've isolated the actual underlying melodic line. Okay, very good. We also talked about modulation. We're going through 3 different keys in here. Okay, A major, the original key, E major, the dominant key, okay, by introducing the D sharp, which is the leading tone to E major, and also B minor, okay, by introducing A sharp, which is the leading tone to B minor. B minor is the relative minor of the subdominant, still within the closely related keys. Okay, and you saw exactly how I kept everything on separate lines for each tonality, how I found my pivot chords to make sure that I have a means to switch between these keys. Okay, and we also looked at the fact that at the very end, on the very end phrase here, Bach is going right in. He jumps right in from B minor, gives you a cadence in B minor, and then switches immediately back to A major without any preparation for that. There's no leading tone being brought in or anything like that. But since you're dealing with the original key, you really don't need anything. Your ear is already prepared to receive the original key, and that's exactly what he does. He gives you the last phrase in A major without any preparation or any warning before. Okay? Very good. Let's move on to the solfege. Okay? If you look at the solfege, let me bring in this. If you look at the solfege, it's written in the key of D minor. Those of you who have requested it, D minor. And how do I know that? Because of that C sharp. If you look throughout the entire solfege here, C sharp is present everywhere. Of course, there's some accidental, as C naturals and so on. I wanted to make sure that, things are a little more difficult than just giving you C sharps all the time. C sharp is very easy to understand because it's the leading tone and really solidifies D minor. Okay. Also, what you have in here that it's a little more difficult is the 2-beat triplet in the in line number 4 and 5. Okay, so make sure that when you practice this, practice these two bars separately to understand how you can actually have a triplet, 3 notes, in the place of 2. Okay, so that's also called a hemiola by the way. Okay, but I like to call it a 2-beat triplet because it's easy to understand. Okay. Also, there's pitches are quite challenging here. I can see that diminished seventh between the A flat and B natural on the first line, on the last measure there, and so on. So again, you have to go back and forth between triplets and straight eighth notes, the end of the third line, and so on. And you have some 16th notes and some formulas, 16th note formulas that you have to be dealing with here. Okay, let me get my beginning pitches here. Re, right? Re. Good. So I'm going to put my metronome now. One time. Re, do, re, mi, fa, mi, do, re, la, sol, la, si, la, sol, fa, sol, la, si, do, sol, fa, mi, re, la, re, do, fa, mi, re, la, si, la, do, re, mi, fa, sol, mi, si, la, re. Fa, mi, fa, sol, la, re, la, fa, sol, la, si, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, do, si, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, sol, fa, do, mi, fa, la, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, re, do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, re. All right, great. Let's move on now to star number 45. This is still in the chapter of 16th notes and different patterns with 16th notes. Okay, number 45 actually throws in changing meters. So you have 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, even a 5/4 somewhere, and a 6/4 also in the in line number 7 here. So Mr. Starr is trying to keep you on your toes with the conducting. Okay, so I'm going to leave my metronome at 70, and let's go through number 45 from Robert Starr's Rhythmic Training Book. da 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 da. All right, this will have to do it. A little challenging. You have to look ahead, make sure that you know how to conduct the next measure while you read the patterns. Next, for next time, take a look at number 46 from chapter 5 this time. This is mixing divisions of the beat, meaning that you're going to get triplets, you're going to get 16th notes, 8th notes, and all kinds of patterns related to those, to the subdivisions of the beat. Okay, so they're all being mixed right now. And this is probably a chapter, it's a shorter chapter, but it's a chapter that really ties together everything you've learned so far. Okay, before we move on to chapter 6, which deals with dividing the beat into 6 different, 6 equal parts. Okay, and we'll see. This is kind of important too, so I think we're going to go through chapter 6 as well. Very good. If you made it this far on this video, you've learned about some new non-chord tones. All right. You've also seen how I analyze a chorale that goes through modulations. Okay. Keeping everything in separate lines, very important. Finding pivot chords for every time you switch keys, and analyzing cadences, always referring back to the original key. Okay. And I also performed number 45. From Robert Starr, and solfege number 48. For next time, solfege number 49, and we're one solfege away from the end of the solfege book here that I've written. There's 50 of them, so 2 more. Number 49 for next time, and number 50 when I do the following video after that. Great. In my next video, we're going to take a look at an orchestral score this time in the context of performing some harmonic analysis. And I chose Beethoven Symphony No. 1, just the very beginning, just the introduction of the Symphony No. 1 by Beethoven. And hopefully with that, you're going to learn about transposing instruments. Okay, not all orchestral instruments are concert pitch instruments, meaning the note that you sound is the note that gets written. Okay, that's called concert pitch. Certain instruments, especially the brass instruments, are transposing instruments. Okay, meaning that if you write a C for the trumpet in B flat, for example, when they play that C, it actually sounds B flat. Okay. Okay. So, for example, you have a piece in C major. Okay. You would have to write the trumpet part in D major, a whole step higher, for them to actually sound concert pitch in C. And there's some other instruments too, not just the trumpets. We're going to look at a few of them, and I might mention some of them outside of the actual Beethoven score too, just for you to have a good idea of what instruments are out there that you have to be careful with when you read them. And this is actually for all musicians. It's not only for conductors. Conductors have to know this, by default, basically. But you as a musician, you really need to know about this. If you ever perform with an orchestra or you're asked to conduct, you need to know how to read the score and know that some instruments out there are transposing instruments. Kind of important. And, I'll walk you through that next time. We'll also perform some harmonic analysis on that introduction of the Beethoven Symphony No. 1, okay? And why it's important to read transposing instrument, because you have to read the right notes when you perform harmonic analysis, all right? So that's very important. All right, until next time, I want you guys to stay healthy and safe and happy and be good. Thank you.